Hello and welcome to episode 4 of our video series on Lord Beaverbrook. Now last time we spoke about his very important and often forgotten role as the Minister of Aircraft Production during World War II and his job as sort of an ambassador to the Soviet Union. In 1949, Lord Beaverbrook leaves politics completely. He resigns from the Conservative Party, and we don't quite know why. Some people surmise that it's because he's a little bit disheartened after the 1945 defeat of his good friend Winston Churchill, the emerging Cold War, perhaps. Also, Britain is not what it once was, and he did tell Winston Churchill himself that it's America's world now. So, in 1949, he leaves and begins focusing on philanthropy. This is when he starts selling off many of his assets and donating that money to charity. Also by then, Lord Beaverbrook is 70 years old, and that's pretty much the life expectancy of a man in those days. So in 1947, he's made the Chancellor of the University of New Brunswick and becomes one of their greatest benefactors. If you look around the University of New Brunswick today, you can see the impact that he made, from the Lady Beaverbrook residence to the Aitken Center. He also established the Beaverbrook Scholarship Foundation to assist young people in the ever-increasing, financially stressful world of post-secondary education. Every year, Lord Beaverbrook would return to New Brunswick for about 6 weeks or so, and to the university he would bring various guests, one of which was future U.S. President John F. Kennedy. He gifted the Beaverbrook Art Gallery to the province of New Brunswick as well, and he didn't just give them the art gallery, he filled it with paintings, brilliant pieces by world-renowned artists like Picasso and Salvador Daley, as well as Canadian artists like Emily Carr and the Group of Seven, and closer to home, local artists like Malara Britton and Jack Humphreys. Closer to home here in Miramichi, he purchased the square, the town square, Queen Elizabeth Park, and filled it with all sorts of treasures and gifted it back to the people of Newcastle. If you look around it today, you'll see very extraordinary pieces. There's a sundial from the 1700s. There's a very old gazebo. It's quite possibly haunted. And of course, the Beaverbrook Kin Center just across the street. Today it's known as. Before that, it was the Beaverbrook Town Hall and Theatre, the former Newcastle Town Hall. As much as Lord Beaverbrook loved politics and media, he loved to entertain just as much. There's local legends that while in the Soviet Union, he thawed the frozen dictator, Joseph Stalin, by singing the Jones Boys, a local folk song.
I'll tell you a tale of the Jones Boys.
So it doesn't come as any surprise that he helped establish the first Miramichi Folk Song Festival with his good friend, Louise Manny.
Worked for Johnny Jones in his mill in Jones's Brook.
It's slightly ironic that Miramichi's greatest historian was actually not born here at all. She was born in Gilead. No, not the place from Handmaid's Tale, someplace in Maine. Gilead, Maine, as a matter of fact. But she grew up here when her family moved to the Miramichi. She was a close friend of Lord Beaverbrook, born back in 1890. Louise Manny was a very gifted child. By the age of 3, it says that she could read and write. She received quite the education, especially for a girl in those times, attending Harkin's Academy, St. Mary's University, and the Ursuline Convent School in Quebec. And she graduated from McGill University in 1913. A talented lady who impressed many people across the area, from New England to New Brunswick, of course, Lord Beaverbrook being the most influential of her friends. In her teenage years, under the pen name of Tennis Girl, she wrote newspaper columns which bore the warning, "For women only." In 1904, she wrote on the subject of marriage. "There are many girls, all honor to them, who turn their backs on matrimony from a sense of duty. They owe to others, and alas, some remain unmarried for the simple reason that they are never asked to change their condition. in the hope of eliciting the opinion of the girls themselves on this vital question, I asked a very charming member of our sex, "Why do you girls never marry?" Quick as a flash, and with a dainty toss of the head, came the answer, "Because they don't want to." And perhaps that is another reason. Lord Beaverbrook and Manny both shared a passion for history and were proud of their Miramichi culture. All the way back in 1947, the topic of recording and preserving local folk music was brought up to Beaverbrook. According to Manny, the conversation went as follows. "Are you musical at all?" Manny, "Well, no." Beaverbrook, "Then get someone who is. How about Bessie Crocker?" A day later, I was phoning Bessie Crocker, according to Louise Manny. "We're going to collect folk songs of for Lord Beaverbrook here in the Miramichi. That's interesting. Well, we'd better begin to make inquiries." It was as simple as that. For days, they went to everyone they met with and said, "Do you know any old songs? Or do you know anybody who does?" Together, Manny and Crocker collected dozens of folk songs, which previously had never been properly cataloged and were only known by memory and word of mouth. In 1958, the first Miramichi Folk Song Festival was held. Now on the radio, Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley were dominating the airwaves. But here in Miramichi, people were craving a local, folksier sound, something that was reminiscent of the logging camps so many years ago. Crowds were drawn to the Beaverbrook Town Hall and Theater, and tradition was born.
That boss is a Joe. G for the grindstone, we grind our rags on.
Another project that Louise Manny and Lord Beaverbrook worked on together was the restoration of the historic graveyard at Wilson's Point. Now, some of the people residing there lived during the 1700s and 1800s. It is the oldest graveyard that we have here on the Miramichi, and sadly, it had fallen into disrepair. In the 1800s, it was actually used as a pig pasture, so you can only imagine the amount of damage that got done. But thankfully, Lord Beaverbrook and Louise Manny began the cleanup. We have another quote from Louise Manny. "At this time, as you will remember, the old burying grounds and church site at Wilson's Point was a howling wilderness. When Lord Beaverbrook acquired this spot to make, in his own words, a center of dignity and repose for the pioneers of Miramichi, his first instructions were to clear out the brush and rubbish, without destroying trees or shrubs or forest vegetation. Mr. Goodfellow and his son Miller set about clearing and yarded some 20 large piles of brush and fallen trees, measuring about 20 feet square and 10 or more feet high. As none of the three men on the committee would supervise the work, Mr. Willison and I volunteered to look after it." Louise Manny devoted her whole life to local history, from her newspaper column to her radio show, and countless documents that she amassed on the history of the area, which benefited many projects, including this one that you're watching right now. In 1966, she received an award from the American Association of State and Local History. And in 1969, Mount Manny was named after her. It also made sense that the first librarian at the Old Manse Library was Louise Manny, Lord Beaverbrook's good friend. Join us next time for the final episode, where we'll take a close look at the Old Manse Library and what is today historic Beaverbrook House. We will also visit the final resting place of Lord Beaverbrook, which is actually not too far away from here. Thank you very much for listening.